These rifles are no less than a predator, the apex among the rifles, and the men who carried them, equally apex. Today, we're ranking 6 of the most extraordinary anti-tank and heavy anti-material rifles ever produced, from the least effective to the most devastating. We're judging them primarily on raw stopping power, muzzle energy, penetration capability, the sheer destructive force behind every pull of the trigger. We'll start with a rifle that looked powerful on paper but consistently disappointed on the battlefield, and we'll build all the way up to a weapon so far ahead of its time, so overwhelmingly brutal in capability that it remains relevant on modern battlefields today. Stay with us, because the top 2 rifles on this list are absolute terror. 6. British Boys Anti-Tank Rifle, the gentleman's mistake. The weapon that looked good in 1937. In 1937, Britain fielded what they believed was a perfectly adequate answer to the armored threat, the British Boys Anti-Tank Rifle, chambered in .55 Boys, a round specifically designed to penetrate the light tank armor common at the time. And here's the thing, in 1937, it worked. Against the thin-skinned tanks of that era, the Boys could punch through about 21 millimeters of armor at 100 yards. That was enough, just barely, but enough. The rifle weighed a brutal 16.3 kilograms, roughly 36 pounds. It had a padded monopod under the barrel, a muzzle brake to tame the ferocious recoil, and a 5-round magazine. It was clunky, heavy, punishing to fire. Soldiers described the recoil as being hit in the shoulder by a sledgehammer. The problem, the world moved on. The Boys rifle's fatal flaw wasn't its design, it was timing. By the time British soldiers carried it into real combat, German tank armor had thickened dramatically. The Panzer III and Panzer IV that Britain encountered in France in 1940 had armored the Boys simply could not reliably penetrate. Reports from Dunkirk and North Africa described soldiers firing Boys rounds directly into German tanks and watching them bounce off. The Boys wasn't useless. It could still disable vehicles, punch through soft-skinned transports, and occasionally find a weak spot on older armor. But as a true anti-tank weapon, it was already obsolete the moment it entered widespread combat. Muzzle energy, approximately 19,000 joules. Respectable, but the lowest of any rifle on this list. That's why the Boys sits firmly at the bottom of our ranking, a well-intentioned weapon that was simply overtaken by history. 5. PTRD 41 and PTRS 41, the Soviet sledgehammers. Born from desperation. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941 and tore through Soviet defenses with astonishing speed, the Red Army found itself in a desperate, catastrophic situation. They needed anti-tank weapons, fast, and they needed them in numbers no other nation could imagine. The answer came in 2 forms. The PTRD-41, a single-shot, bolt-action monster chambered in 14.5 by 114 millimeters, and the PTRS-41, a semi-automatic version of essentially the same concept. Both rifles fired the same cartridge, the 14.5 by 114 millimeter round, a projectile so powerful it generates approximately 31,000 joules of muzzle energy. That's nearly double the Boys rifle. At 100 meters, it could punch through 40 millimeters of hardened steel armor. Here's what makes the Soviet rifles genuinely remarkable. Not just their performance, but their production. Over the course of the war, the Soviets produced more than 400,000 PTRD-41 rifles and roughly 63,000 PTRS-41 rifles, nearly 500,000 anti-tank rifles. Nothing else comes close. Soviet anti-tank squads became a critical part of the Red Army's defensive doctrine. They couldn't stop Tigers or Panthers, no personal weapon could, but against lighter vehicles, half-tracks, armored cars, and the flanks and rear of older tanks, they were devastatingly effective. The PTRD-41 in particular became beloved for its brutal simplicity. It had almost no moving parts. You could field strip it with frozen fingers. It was reliable, accurate, and if you hit the right spot, absolutely lethal to armored vehicles. The reason it sits at number 5 rather than higher is penetration ceiling. By mid-war, German armor evolution had largely outpaced the 14.5 millimeter round against frontal engagement. The Soviet strength was volume, not the ultimate performance ceiling of any individual rifle. 4. The Finnish Lahti L39, the elephant gun of Lapland. Finland's peculiar genius. Few nations in history have punched so far above their weight militarily as Finland during the Winter War of 1939 to 1940. Outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting an enemy with 10 times their population, the Finns developed a brutal, inventive approach to warfare. The Lahti L39 was part of that inventive tradition. Chambered in 20 by 138.B millimeters, a semi-rimmed anti-aircraft cartridge, the L39 was a semi-automatic 20mm anti-tank and anti-aircraft rifle that weighed 49 kilograms. That's not a misprint. 49 kilograms, over 100 pounds. Finnish soldiers called it the Norsupusi, the elephant gun. They weren't wrong. Performance that defied common sense. The L39 fired a 20mm projectile at just over 800 meters per second, generating approximately 45,000 joules of muzzle energy. At 100 meters, it could punch through up to 30 millimeters of hardened steel armor. Its 10-round semi-automatic capability meant a trained Finnish shooter could place multiple armor-piercing rounds on a target within seconds. Finnish crews used the L39 with remarkable creativity, firing from sleds, from improvised ski mounts, and later in the continuation war, from fortified positions against Soviet armor. Its semi-auto action gave it a rate of fire no other anti-tank rifle could match. Its Achilles heel? Portability. At 49 kilograms, it required a 2-man crew and a sled or vehicle to move with any speed. That limitation, combined with its caliber being on the lower end for late-war armor, places it firmly in the middle of our list. 3. Solothurn S18-1000, the Swiss precision monster. Swiss engineering meets World War. The Swiss are known for precision, watches, chocolate, neutral diplomacy, and, as it turns out, absolutely extraordinary anti-tank firearms. The Solothurn S18-1000 was technically a product of a Swiss manufacturer operating under German Rheinmetall ownership, a clever workaround for post-World War I weapons production restrictions. The result was one of the most beautifully engineered semi-automatic anti-tank rifles ever produced. Chambered in 20 by 138B millimeter, the same round as the Finnish Lahti, the Solothurn was a recoil-operated semi-automatic weapon with a 10-round magazine, quick-detach barrel for cooling, and engineering tolerances so tight it was said you could feel the quality through your gloves. The S18-1000 generated approximately 45,000 to 50,000 joules of muzzle energy, depending on ammunition variant. Using armor-piercing rounds, it could defeat up to 40 millimeters of vertical armor at 100 meters, significantly more than the Soviet 14.5 millimeter round at the same distance. What separated the Solothurn from the Lahti wasn't raw caliber, both fired 20 millimeter rounds, but execution. The Solothurn's recoil management system was dramatically smoother, its semi-auto action was more reliable across temperature extremes, and crucially, it was fielded by German and Italian forces with access to a wider variety of 20mm ammunition. German Afrika Korps crews mounted Solotherns on half-tracks and used them with devastating effect against British armored cars and light tanks in the Western Desert campaigns. Italian forces deployed them against Allied positions in North Africa and the Mediterranean. The Solothurn sits at number 3 because while its power ceiling is genuinely elite, placing it clearly above everything below it, it's still outmatched by the weapons above it on this list. The top 2 rifles don't just step up from the Solothurn, they step into a different dimension entirely. 2. Steyr IWS 2000, from the future. The rifle that rewrote the rules. Everything on this list so far has been a conventional rifle, a gun that fires a bullet. The Steyr IWS 2000 is something else entirely. It's a glimpse at what happens when modern military engineers decide that bullets are simply no longer enough. Developed by Steyr Maurer-Maliger and introduced in the late 1990s, the IWS 2000 fires not a conventional bullet, but a flechette, a dart. A tungsten-cored, fin-stabilized sub-caliber penetrator weighing just 20 grams, traveling at an almost incomprehensible 1,450 meters per second. To put that in perspective, a standard rifle bullet travels at roughly 900 meters per second. The IWS 2000's flechette is moving at nearly twice that speed. Physics weaponized. Kinetic energy is a function of mass times velocity squared. Velocity matters far more than mass. That's why the IWS 2000's lightweight flechette, traveling at Mach 4.2, generates muzzle energy estimates of approximately 55,000 to 60,000 joules, more than the Solothurn, more than the Lahti, more than anything else of its era in the shoulder-fired category. The IWS 2000 weighs 18 kilograms, heavy but manageable. Its hydropneumatic recoil system absorbs the energy so efficiently that despite the weapon's extraordinary power, recoil is described as comparable to a standard 50 BMG rifle. Why not number 1? Here's the honest answer: production, deployment, and the raw ceiling of what sits above it. The IWS 2000 was never adopted at large scale. It remains an experimental, limited production weapon, fascinating, futuristic, and genuinely powerful beyond its era. But the rifle at number 1? It fires a round that makes the IWS 2000's flechette look modest. And it has been proving itself on real battlefields against real targets for decades.
1. Anzio 20mm rifle, the American Titan. When one company decided to build the impossible. The Anzio 20mm rifle was not designed by a government program. There was no committee, no budget meeting, no bureaucratic approval process. It was built by a small Florida-based company called Anzio Ironworks because they could. Because someone looked at the landscape of anti-material rifles and decided that everything existing simply wasn't enough. The Anzio fires the 20x102mm Vulcan cartridge, the same round used in the M168 anti-aircraft gun and the M61 Vulcan rotary cannon mounted on military jets. This is an aircraft cannon round, a weapon designed to destroy other aircraft at combat speeds, and the Anzio fires it from a shoulder-mounted bolt-action rifle. The numbers are almost offensive. Muzzle energy, approximately 70,000 to 80,000 joules. That's nearly 4 times the boys, nearly double the Solothurn, significantly more than the IWS 2000's flechette. The Anzio 20mm fires a 20mm explosive, armor-piercing, or incendiary round at approximately 1,030 meters per second. At 1,000 meters, the Anzio can punch through more than 38 millimeters of hardened steel armor, and using modern API, armor-piercing incendiary variants, the incendiary charge means that even a partial penetration can catastrophically destroy a vehicle's systems. Against unarmored targets, vehicles, radar installations, fuel supplies, aircraft on the ground, light naval vessels, the Anzio is in a category of destruction virtually no other man-portable weapon can touch. The Anzio weighs approximately 26 kilograms in standard configuration, heavy but considerably lighter than the Lahti. It breaks down for transport. The barrel is interchangeable, and Anzio Ironworks actually offers multiple barrel lengths and configurations depending on the intended use. The muzzle brake on the Anzio is one of the most aggressive ever designed for a shoulder-fired weapon, reducing felt recoil to survivable levels, though shooters universally describe the blast as almost physically overwhelming. Firing the Anzio 20mm without ear protection at close range risks permanent hearing damage from a single shot. The rifle is currently classified as a Title I firearm in the United States, technically legal to own, though acquiring the ammunition is the more significant challenge. 20x102mm Vulcan rounds are not exactly available at your local sporting goods store. Every rifle on this list represents a genuine engineering achievement. The boys was a reasonable answer to a 1930s problem. The Soviet PTRD was produced in staggering numbers with admirable reliability. The Lahti was Finnish ingenuity personified. The Solothurn was Swiss precision at its finest. The IWS 2000 was a peek at the future. But the Anzio 20mm rifle fires an aircraft cannon round from a platform one person can carry, aim, and fire. And nothing else leaves the same kind of smoking, catastrophic destruction behind it when that trigger breaks. It is, by any honest measure of raw power, the most devastating shoulder-fired rifle ever made available to a single soldier. And that's why it sits, unchallenged, at number 1.